I'm not feeling well.
Oh, what's wrong?
Evander Zareth doesn't drink and doesn't lose control, and he definitely doesn't show up at my door at 2 a.m. But when I opened it and saw my boss, the most impossible man in New York, leaning against the doorframe with eyes that looked like they'd carried the world alone, saying things I only heard in my most secret dreams, I knew everything was about to change, especially when he looked at my red silk pajamas and completely lost the composure he'd spent a year building in front of me.
Welcome to my library. I'm Lena, and our story is just beginning.
Chapter 1. The Controlled Collapse.
I can't pretend anymore.
My apartment was on the 4th floor of a vintage building in the West Village, a structure that held on to old New York charm while housing modern, chaotic lives. The space was small, but every inch breathed personality. Plants hung in the windows, capturing the morning light. Stacked books formed unstable towers in the corners, and an entire wall dedicated to colorful post-its displayed reminders ranging from urgent to absolutely random. That Tuesday morning, I was deep in sleep when the silence was shattered. Bam, bam, bam. The pounding on the door echoed through the apartment with an urgency that made my heart race before my mind had even fully processed waking up. I sat bolt upright in bed, blonde hair falling messily over my shoulders, pulse hammering in my ears. My eyes found the alarm clock on the nightstand, 2:13 a.m. Red numbers glowed in the darkness like a warning that nothing good happened at this hour. I ran my hand over my face, trying to shake off the fog of sleep while my brain worked at reduced speed to process the situation. Who pounds like that? I muttered to myself, voice hoarse with sleep and confusion. Is there a fire? Did the zombie apocalypse start? I got out of bed, stumbling slightly, bare feet meeting the cold wooden floor. The path to the door seemed longer than usual, each step weighted by hesitation between curiosity and caution. When I finally reached the entrance, I leaned forward and looked through the peephole, expecting to find a desperate neighbor, or maybe a confused delivery person. What I saw made me freeze completely. Evander Zareth was there, my boss, the man who in an entire year had never, absolutely never, lost his composure in front of me. The same man who ran meetings with surgical precision and maintained absolute control over every aspect of his life. But the person leaning against the doorframe wasn't that Evander. His tie was crooked, hanging loosely around his neck as if it had been tugged impatiently. 2 buttons of his white shirt were undone, revealing the base of his throat in a way I'd never seen. His dark hair, normally combed back with impeccable perfection, was completely disheveled, strands falling over his forehead. He leaned against the doorframe, as if he needed that physical support to remain standing. But it was the expression on his face that really shocked me. Vulnerability, pain, exhaustion. Emotions that Evander Zareth never allowed to reach the surface were there, naked and raw, stamped across every line of his face. Evander. The name left my lips in a worried whisper, loaded with genuine alarm. Without thinking twice, I unlocked the door and opened it, completely forgetting any protocol or hesitation. With the door open, Evander raised his gaze. For the first time in a year of working together, I saw him completely disarmed. All the barriers he kept so carefully erected now reduced to rubble. But then his eyes traveled over me, from top to bottom, and something changed drastically in his expression. The vulnerability gave way to a different intensity, something more dangerous and infinitely more complex. Because I was standing there, in the doorway of my own home, wearing a set of red silk pajamas I'd never wear in public. The shorts barely covered my thighs. The thin strapped camisole followed the curves of my body in a way that should have been innocent, but definitely wasn't, not under that gaze. My blonde hair fell loose over my bare shoulders, and for the first time since we'd met, there was nothing professional between us, just the raw truth of 2 people in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning. Evander stood paralyzed, looking at me like a man who'd just seen something he shouldn't, but was completely incapable of looking away. His breathing became visible and heavy, and I could practically feel the tension emanating from him in waves. "Evander, are you okay?" The genuine concern in my voice cut through the fog of that strange moment. I took a step forward, completely forgetting about my clothes. "What happened? Why are you dressed like that?" His voice came out hoarse, rough in a way that made something contract in my stomach. I blinked, completely confused by the question when there were much more urgent concerns at play. "What?" Evander gestured vaguely in my direction, the movement clumsy and imprecise like someone who definitely wasn't in their normal state. "Like that. That way." I looked down at my own clothes and then back at him with an expression that clearly said, "Seriously? Because it's 2 a.m., Evander. I'm in my pajamas, and it's my house." He ran his hand through his messy hair, messing up the dark strands even more. A laugh escaped his lips, but it was a pained sound, loaded with something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. "Right, obviously. Because right now you need to look like this." destroying what's left of my sanity. My concern intensified instantly. I pulled him into the apartment firmly, closing the door behind us before some nosy neighbor decided to investigate the hallway drama. My hands found his shoulders, gripping tightly as I forced him to look directly at me. "Hey, look at me." My tone was firm but gentle, the same voice I used when he was stressed about some difficult negotiation. "Have you been drinking?" Evander finally met my gaze, and there was so much emotion concentrated in that look I almost stepped back. It was like looking directly at the sun, too intense, too hot, too dangerous. Whiskey. Whole bottle, alone in the office. Alarm went off in my mind like deafening sirens. In a year working alongside Evander Zareth, I'd never, not once, seen him drink beyond a glass of wine at business dinners. He had absolute control over himself, over every aspect of his life. Drinking an entire bottle of whiskey alone was so out of character it might as well have been a different person. "Evander, what happened?" The words came out fast, urgent. "Is everyone okay? Is Reese okay?" "Nona, nothing bad happened," he interrupted, holding my wrists, fingers warm against my skin. The touch sent electricity running up my arms. "What happened is, I can't take it anymore." My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. "Can't take what anymore?" Pretending. The silence that followed was so heavy I felt like the air had been sucked out of the apartment. I stared at him, trying to decipher the meaning behind that single word, while my brain worked in overdrive to process all the possibilities. "Pretending what, Ev?" The question came out soft, loaded with genuine care. The nickname, the one I only used when we were alone, when he set aside the Don and was just Evander, made something break in him. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his shoulders dropped slightly, as if that small word carried enough weight to bring down his last defenses. Evander closed his eyes for a long moment, and I waited, hands still on his shoulders, offering silent support while he gathered the courage to say whatever he'd come to say. When he opened his eyes again, the vulnerability there was so raw it hurt to look at. "That you're just my secretary, that I don't care when you laugh at Reese's jokes, that I don't notice when you bite your pen while concentrating, that I don't think about you when I should be focused on important meetings." My world stopped spinning, my breath caught, trapped somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Those words, those impossible confessions coming from the most controlled man I knew, couldn't be real. Evander, his name came out broken, loaded with emotion I didn't know how to process. But he wasn't finished. Now that he'd started, the words flowed as if a dam had been broken, releasing everything he'd kept locked away for so long. "I came here because I spent the whole day today watching you work. Efficient, brilliant, beautiful without even trying. And when you left, the office felt empty. Everything feels empty when you're not there." My hands were still on his shoulders, but now I squeezed harder, as if I needed that physical contact to make sure I was really awake, that this was really happening. "You're drunk." That was all I could say, because accepting those words as truth seemed too big, too scary. "You're not thinking straight." I drank because thinking straight means continuing to pretend. Evander's voice was firm despite the alcohol, each word loaded with absolute conviction. "And I'm tired, Quinn. Tired of pretending I don't want you near me all the time, that I don't want the right to hug you when you're stressed, that I don't want to wake up with you being the first thing I see." My eyes started to well up, because hearing this from him was everything I secretly wanted but never admitted, not even to myself. For a year I'd pushed those feelings down, locked them away somewhere deep, where they couldn't interfere with the professionalism we both maintained so carefully. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" The question came out in a trembling whisper. Evander let out a bitter laugh, humorless. "Because I'm your boss, because this is inappropriate, because you deserve someone normal, without the weight I carry." And there it was, the spark that ignited my defensive indignation. My sarcasm rose to the surface like armor against the vulnerability threatening to consume me. "And you decided what I deserve without asking me?" Evander looked at me surprised, clearly not expecting that tone. "Quinn, you spent a year deciding what's best for me by yourself?" I interrupted, stepping back slightly but maintaining eye contact. "Very generous, Mr. Zareth, but I'm perfectly capable of deciding what I want." Something lit up in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear of what I might say next. "And what do you want?" I took a deep breath, gathering all the courage I had. My heart beat wildly against my ribs, but I kept my gaze steady, refusing to look away. "I want to know if tomorrow, when you're sober, you'll still remember saying these things, or if you'll pretend it didn't happen and go back to being the impossible boss you've always been." Evander took a step forward, eliminating the space I'd created between us. Now we were dangerously close enough for me to feel the heat emanating from him, the smell of whiskey mixed with his signature cologne. "I'll remember every word." The promise in his voice was absolute, unwavering, and I'll repeat all of them when I'm sober, if you'll let me. The tension in the air was so thick I could barely breathe. The apartment around us seemed to disappear, the world reducing to just that minimal space between our bodies, that moment suspended in time where everything could change. You need to go home. The words came out low but firm. I knew I was right, even though every part of me wanted to pull him closer. You need to go sleep, and then tomorrow we'll talk. For real. Sober. What if I don't want to go? The challenge in his voice was soft, but it was there. Evander. His name came out as both warning and plea. He raised his hand slowly, giving me all the time in the world to pull back if I wanted. When I didn't move, his fingers finally touched my face. Gentle, almost reverent, as if touching something precious that could break at any moment. I spent a year not touching you. The confession came out hoarse, loaded with all the weight of those months of restraint. A whole year. Let me have this. Just this. I closed my eyes at the touch, allowing myself just that moment of weakness. His thumb traced my cheek with a gentleness that contrasted completely with the intensity in his gaze. When I opened my eyes again, I found him looking at me with such intensity it physically hurt. A decision formed in my mind. It wasn't the safe decision, or necessarily the sensible one, but it was the right one. You're staying, on the couch, until you're sober enough to go home safely. Because if you leave now and something happens, I'll kill you. A tiny smile touched his lips, the first since he'd arrived. Always so worried about me. Someone has to be, I retorted, allowing a bit of humor back into the situation. You're terrible at taking care of yourself. Because I have you to do it. The simplicity of that statement, the way he said it like absolute truth, made my heart clench. I pushed him gently toward the couch, needing distance to think clearly. Sit. I'll get water, a blanket, and aspirin for tomorrow. Evander obeyed, sinking into the couch with exhaustion that was finally catching up to him. As I moved through the kitchen, gathering the necessary items, I could feel his gaze following every movement. It was a sensation both new and old, being watched by him without the layers of professionalism between us. When I returned with a glass of water and 2 aspirin tablets, I found him leaning back against the cushions, eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't completely decipher. I placed everything on the coffee table next to him and went to get a blanket from the closet. Here, I held out the blanket, but before I could step back, Evander caught my hand. Thank you. It was simple, but the gratitude in his voice went far beyond water and blankets. It was gratitude for not sending him away, for listening to him, for caring. I squeezed his hand briefly before pulling away. Sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. I went back to my bedroom, but it took hours to fall asleep again, my mind replaying every word, every touch, every moment of that impossible early morning. 6:47 a.m. Evander woke up with his neck aching from sleeping on the couch, and memory returning in sharp, relentless flashes. For one blessed moment, he only felt the throbbing headache. Then everything came back at once. Oh no! He sat up quickly. Terrible mistake that made his head protest violently, and looked around Quinn's apartment. Empty. The bedroom was quiet, the door ajar showing a perfectly made bed. She'd already left. Evander ran his hand over his face, trying to process the disaster he'd possibly created the night before. But then his eyes fell on the kitchen island, and something inside him warmed. Fresh coffee still steaming in a thermos, 2 aspirin tablets next to a glass of water, and a hot pink post-it that practically screamed Quinn's personality. He stood up, ignoring the protest of every muscle, and went to the island. He picked up the note with fingers that trembled slightly. Good morning, Mr. Zareth. Went to work early. 7:30 meeting you, forgot to confirm. I confirmed it. Coffee's hot. Aspirin in the glass. We have a lot to talk about today. Don't disappear. Q. P.S. You're a disaster when you're drunk, but at least an honest disaster. Evander held the note, and for the first time in years, smiled for real. Not the controlled smile he used in meetings or the polite one he offered at social events. A genuine smile that reached his eyes and lifted something heavy in his chest. She hadn't sent him away. Not just that. She'd taken care of him, left coffee, and most importantly, wanted to talk. He grabbed his phone and typed a message, each word chosen carefully. I remember everything, and I still mean every word. Your office. 6 p.m. We need to talk. E. The response came in seconds, fast enough to make his heart race. 6 p.m. And you better be sober. Q. Evander couldn't contain another smile. When Reese entered the office later that morning, he found a scene that made him stop completely in the doorway. His brother, Evander Zareth, the most serious and controlled Don who'd ever commanded the Familia, was sitting at his desk, smiling at his phone. Smiling. For real. You're smiling, Reese declared, closing the door behind him. Who died? No one, Evander responded without looking away from the screen. Reese approached, eyes scanning his brother's wrinkled clothes with growing amusement. You slept in your clothes, away from home. Evander Zareth, you... Shut up, Reese. But the smile didn't disappear, and Reese knew his brother well enough to put the pieces together. His eyes widened with sudden understanding. It's Quinn. It wasn't a question. You finally told Quinn? Evander didn't respond, but he didn't deny it either. He just kept smiling at his phone. where a new message had just arrived. And, take a shower. You look like you got hit by a truck. Reese watched his brother type a response, still smiling, and knew everything had changed. After a year of watching Evander torture himself with unrequited feelings, or at least undeclared ones, finally something had happened. And from the smile on his brother's face, it had been something good. Quinn was sitting in her office, trying desperately to focus on the presentation open on her laptop, but her mind kept going back to the night before, to every word Evander said, to his touch on her face, to the promise to talk when he was sober. Her phone buzzed. Message from Sable. You're acting weird. What happened? Quinn looked at the screen for a long moment before starting to type. He showed up drunk at my door at 2 a.m. and said things. The response was instant. What things? Quinn took a deep breath before responding. That he thinks about me, that he wants to stop pretending, that I make everything less empty. And what did you do? Made him sleep on my couch, and we have a talk scheduled for today at 6 p.m. There was a pause before the next message arrived. Quinn Thorne, you're in love with him. Quinn looked at the message, at that simple and direct statement Sable made without hesitation, and for the first time, she didn't deny it. Not to herself, not anymore, because it was true. She was in love with Evander Zareth, and in a few hours, she'd have to face that truth face to face with him. But when 6 p.m. arrived and she walked into his office, Quinn didn't expect to find him like this. Sober, determined, and with words that would change absolutely everything between them. Chapter 2, Truths and Decisions.
I still mean everything.
At 6 p.m. sharp, I stopped in front of Evander's office door. My heart beat erratically, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum announcing something inevitable. I took 3 deep breaths, trying to calm the nerves that seemed determined to betray me, and finally knocked on the polished mahogany door. Come in. His voice came from the other side, firm and controlled. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. Evander was standing by the panoramic window, hands in the pockets of his impeccably tailored dress pants, observing the city stretching out below. When he heard me enter, he turned completely, and our eyes met across the wide space of the office. He was impeccable, completely different from the disheveled, vulnerable man who'd shown up at my door the previous morning. The dark gray suit fell perfectly over his broad shoulders. The white shirt didn't have a single wrinkle, and his tie was aligned with millimetric precision. His dark hair was combed back in the usual way, every strand in place. Sober, serious, and devastatingly handsome. You came. It wasn't a question. There was genuine relief in his voice, as if part of him had doubted I would actually show up. I closed the door behind me, hearing the soft click of the lock echo in the silence. I said I would. The silence that followed was tense, loaded with everything that needed to be said, with everything that had changed between us since that impossible early morning. The air seemed electrified, vibrating with an energy that made every hair on my body stand up. Evander took the first step toward me, then another, closing the distance between us with measured, deliberate steps. He stopped a few feet from me, close enough for me to feel the heat emanating from him, far enough not to pressure me. His dark eyes studied me with an intensity that made me swallow hard. I remember everything I said yesterday. The words came out firm, each syllable loaded with absolute conviction, and I don't regret any of it. I crossed my arms over my chest, more from protective instinct than true defense. My heart raced faster and faster, but I kept my voice controlled. You were drunk, and finally honest, he retorted immediately, taking another step that eliminated almost all the space between us. Now he was too close, invading my personal space in a way that made my breath catch. Quinn, I spent a year trying to be professional, but I can't take it anymore. You're not just my secretary. You're the person who makes my day make sense. The raw sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at me as if I were the only thing that mattered in the entire universe, made something inside me melt. But I still had doubts, fears that needed to be addressed before we could move forward. And what about work? My voice came out more vulnerable than I intended, exposing exactly how much this affected me. The rules? Evander ran his hand through his hair, the only sign of nervousness he showed. I'll talk to HR tomorrow, transfer you to a better position. No direct reporting, because I'm not going to put you in a complicated situation, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't want you anymore. He'd already thought of everything. He'd already planned every detail of how to make this possible without compromising my career or reputation. It was so characteristic of him, always 3 steps ahead, always taking care of every angle, always protecting the people he loved, even before declaring that love. I took a deep breath, gathering all the courage I had to say what needed to be said. Me too. I can't pretend anymore either, but I need to know, is this real? It's not just attraction? Because if it's just that, I couldn't finish the sentence. Evander pulled me close to him in a quick, decisive movement, his hands holding my arms firmly but without hurting. We were so close I could feel each of his breaths, the heat of his body against mine, the smell of his cologne mixed with something that was uniquely Evander. Quinn Thorne, I'm in love with you. The confession came out like a promise, like a vow, like an absolute truth that admitted no questioning. Completely, ridiculously, and if you give me a chance, I'll prove it every day. And then I did what I'd wanted to do for an entire year. I leaned forward, eliminated the minimal distance that still existed between us, and kissed him. The entire world disappeared the moment our lips touched. A year of unresolved tension, of stolen glances that lasted a second longer than they should, of accidental touches that sent electricity down my spine. Everything exploded in that absolutely perfect kiss. His hands moved up to my face, holding me with a gentleness that contrasted completely with the intensity of the kiss. I allowed myself to melt against him, my own hands finding the fabric of his shirt and gripping it as if I needed that contact to stay standing. The kiss was everything I'd imagined during sleepless nights and more. Soft but urgent, gentle but desperate, full of all the emotion we'd both carefully stored away for so long. When we finally separated, we were both breathless, forehead against forehead, eyes closed, just feeling the moment and letting the reality of what had just happened settle in. "So we're doing this?" I whispered against his lips, still not completely believing this was real and not another one of my impossible dreams. Evander smiled, a true, genuine smile that lit up his entire face and made my heart do somersaults in my chest. Officially, we both smiled like teenagers in love for the first time, lost in our own bubble of happiness where nothing existed beyond the two of us. But then his phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the moment like a sharp knife and bringing us abruptly back to reality. The smile on Evander's face disappeared instantly, as if it had been turned off by a switch. He looked at the phone screen and his expression changed completely, the vulnerability and happiness giving way to something cold, calculating, and vaguely dangerous. It was like watching a mask slide over his face, transforming him into a completely different person right before my eyes. "Dorian," he said simply before answering, his voice already changing to a tone I'd never heard from him before. "Talk." I stepped back instinctively, giving him space, but I couldn't help observing the transformation happening. His voice became icy, authoritative, loaded with a weight and power that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if the Evander I knew had been completely replaced by something much more dangerous. "Urgent meeting." Evander repeated the words of whoever was on the other end of the line, voice completely devoid of emotion. "Rossetti want territory. Tomorrow, noon, port." His tone was purely professional now, but there was something more there, something dark and relentless hidden beneath the surface. He asked quick, precise questions in a language I couldn't completely understand, using terms that sounded vaguely threatening even without full context. When he finally hung up a few minutes later, the dawn was fully present. There was no trace of the man who had just kissed me as if I were his heir, his salvation, his reason for existing. This version of Evander was sharp as a blade, relentless, and genuinely frightening in a way that made my stomach clench uncomfortably. I watched the transformation happen right in front of me, and for the first time since all this started, a question formed in my mind with crystal clarity and impossible to ignore. Who was he really? The vulnerable man who showed up at my door? The controlled boss I'd known for a year? Or this third person I'd just witnessed? Cold, dangerous, and completely in control of something I clearly didn't understand. And more importantly, did I really know Evander Zareth? Or was I falling in love with someone who was essentially a stranger wearing different masks depending on the situation? The next morning, when Quinn found the phone he'd forgotten in the office and saw encrypted messages about familia and territory, she realized the man she loved was keeping secrets much bigger than she'd imagined. Chapter 3. The Truth Revealed.
You lied to me.
The next morning, when I found the phone he'd forgotten in the office and saw encrypted messages about familia and territory, I realized the man I loved was keeping secrets much bigger than I'd imagined. I was organizing some documents on Evander's desk when I noticed the device left beside the computer. The phone vibrated repeatedly, the screen lighting up with notifications accumulating in an alarming sequence. I picked up the device to put it away safely, but the words that appeared on the locked screen made my blood run cold. "Familia needs decision on Southern Territory. Port protection confirmed. 3 men. Shipment arrived. Weapons verified." My heart raced. Familia, territory, weapons. These weren't words from legitimate business. With trembling hands, I called Sable. "I need you to investigate something for me." I spoke quickly when she answered. "About Evander." There was a pause. "Are you sure? Because if I dig, I'll find everything, and you might not like it." I looked at the messages that kept coming. "I'm sure. I need the truth. Give me until Sunday night." The next 2 days were torture. Evander noticed something was different, but when he asked, I lied and said I was just tired. Guilt ate away at me, but the need to know the truth was greater. Sunday night, Sable's email arrived. Subject: you need to see this. Now. The file I opened completely destroyed my world. Evander Zareth wasn't a CEO of investments. He was the Don of the Zareth Famiglia, Italian mafia that had operated in New York for 3 generations. The investments were a front. The truth was organized crime. Photos of him in meetings with known mobsters. Documents about territory division, money laundering records, protection rackets. It was all there, meticulously compiled by Sable, proving that the man I loved had lied since day one. I spent the night awake, crying, trying to process the betrayal. When the sun rose, I was still on the couch, eyes swollen, heart in pieces. Monday morning, he called. I ignored it. He called again. I ignored it. The messages started coming. Good morning, beautiful. I dreamed about you. Is everything okay? Call me. I'm worried, Quinn. Each message was a knife to the heart because they sounded genuine. But how could I trust now? How could I believe any word when everything had been a lie? At 9:30 at night, heavy knocking on the door. Him. My entire body froze. I wasn't ready. Quinn, please. I know you're there. I just need to know you're okay. The concern in his voice broke me. I stood up on trembling legs and opened the door. He was disheveled, tie loose, hair messy, expression of genuine concern. Thank God. You weren't answering, I thought. Come in. I cut him off, voice cold. Evander entered slowly. I pointed to the laptop open on the table, showing a photo of him with known criminals. What do you really do? I saw when he understood. His eyes went to the laptop, then back to me. The silence was suffocating. I run the Zareth Familia, Mafia. Yes, that simple word broke something inside me. The tears started falling, hot and bitter. You lied! I screamed, pain exploding into fury. A whole year, every day, you lied to my face. I omitted, he corrected calmly, taking a cautious step. I was going to tell you, but I wanted you to know me first. As a man, not as the title I carry. His rational justification fueled my anger. I stepped back, putting the table between us. You put me in danger. The words came out in a shout. Working beside you without knowing, I could have been kidnapped, killed by your enemies. Never! His voice thundered through the apartment with an intensity that made everything vibrate. His eyes burned with absolute conviction. No one touches you. I'd give my life before anyone dares to hurt you. The ferocity in the promise paralyzed me momentarily, but it didn't change the facts. It didn't change the fundamental lie. I don't know if I can live in this world, I whispered, voice broken. Something died in Evander's eyes. He stepped back, creating physical distance between us for the first time. When he spoke, his voice was empty. Then go. I love you too much to trap you in a life that scares you. I grabbed my purse and left without looking back. I left him alone in my apartment, left my heart in pieces on the floor. 3 days later, Reese showed up at my office Monday morning. Without his usual smile, he closed the door and sat down without invitation. Can we talk? He asked seriously. It's to tell you a story. You decide what to do after. I looked at him, seeing the resemblance to Evander. If this is to convince me, no. It's so you know the complete truth. For a long moment, he just watched me, deciding where to start. Evander was 24 when our father was murdered. The statement shocked me. It was an execution, a rival who wanted our operation. They killed him in front of the whole family. Nonna, me, my sister. We saw everything. My breath caught. I didn't know. Evander didn't want this. He wanted to be an architect. He'd been accepted to Columbia, had plans, dreams. Reese looked out the window with a distant expression. But when Dad died, the familia needed a leader, and he was the oldest. He didn't have to accept. I argued weakly. He did. Reese looked at me directly, because if he hadn't accepted, the familia would have entered civil war. Rivals would have attacked. And all of us, Nonna, me, Celeste, would have died. So he sacrificed everything. Dreams, freedom, normal life, everything to protect us. The tears returned, but different now. Not anger, understanding. He loves once and only once, Quinn. Reese's voice became soft. If you leave, he survives, but he'll never be happy again. The question is, do you love him enough to accept all of him? The question hung in the air. Reese stood up, heading for the door. He would tell you everything if you gave him a chance, he said simply, but you ran before he could. The decision is yours, but think carefully before you throw away something real out of fear of the unknown. He left, leaving me alone with thoughts that wouldn't settle. 3 days thinking about Reese's words, about Evander's expression when he said he loved me too much, about the truth of who he was and why. 3 days to realize that love wasn't accepting only the easy parts. It was choosing to stay when things got hard. Thursday night, I knocked on the door of the Zareth mansion. My heart beat wildly, but for the first time in days, I felt like I was making the right choice. The door opened. Evander was destroyed. Deep dark circles, messy hair, something broken in his posture. When he saw me, he froze. Quinn, I want to try. The words came out firm. For real, but with conditions. Total transparency, no omissions, and you're going to have to teach me everything about this world, because if I'm going to be in it, I need to understand. For a moment, he just looked at me as if he couldn't believe it. Then he pulled me into his arms, hugging me as if I were the only thing keeping him standing. I promise you'll have total transparency. I'll teach you everything, protect you in any circumstance. I pulled back to look at him. I don't want you to protect me from everything. I want to be your partner, for real. Something changed in his gaze. Admiration mixed with intense love. You're incredible, and you're complicated, but I accept all the complications. He kissed me, deep and desperate, sealing the promise. When we separated, both smiling through tears, he held my hand. Come, there's a lot I need to tell you. We entered the mansion together, hand in hand. The path would be difficult, dangerous, uncertain, but we'd be together, and that made all the difference. But while Quinn chose love over fear, Dorian Ashcroft watched from afar, smiling, because he had the perfect plan to use Evander's heart against him. Chapter 4: Dorian's Game.
He's finally weak.
Dorian Ashcroft watched from his office on the 10th floor, fingers drumming methodically on the mahogany desk as he analyzed the photos spread out before him. Each image captured moments between Evander and Quinn, entering the Zareth mansion together, leaving restaurants hand in hand, sharing stolen kisses in parking lots they thought were empty. A cruel smile curved his lips as he connected the dots with surgical precision. Evander Zareth, the most relentless and controlled Don New York had seen in decades, finally had a weakness. And that weakness had a name, a face, and a predictable routine: Quinn Thorne. For years, Dorian had waited patiently for an opportunity to take control of the Familia. He was the trusted advisor, the man who knew all the secrets, all the operations, all the contacts. But Evander had always been untouchable. No vices to exploit, no weaknesses to manipulate, nothing that could be used as leverage to remove him from power. Until now. Dorian picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. When they answered on the other end, he spoke in a calm, controlled voice that perfectly hid the excitement he felt. I need a service. Nothing violent, just persuasive. I want a certain young woman to feel very unsafe over the next few days. On Tuesday afternoon, Quinn was leaving the office when she noticed the car, a black sedan with dark windows parked across the street, engine running. It wouldn't be anything unusual. Cars parked on that street all the time, if not for the fact that the same vehicle had been there when she arrived that morning. She shook her head, trying to push away the paranoia that was starting to seep into her thoughts. She was just being dramatic, seeing threats where none existed. Evander had promised protection, and she trusted him. She walked to her own car, unlocked the doors, and got in. The black sedan followed her. At first, Quinn tried to rationalize. Maybe they were going in the same direction by coincidence. But when she turned left instead of going straight like she always did, the sedan turned too. When she accelerated, nervousness growing, the car maintained the same distance. Not close enough to be obviously threatening, not far enough to be ignored. Her heart raced, hands gripping the steering wheel with force that made her knuckles turn white. She grabbed her phone with a trembling hand and called Evander. He answered on the second ring. Quinn, everything okay? There's a car following me. The words came out fast, loaded with genuine fear she was trying to control. Black sedan. Dark windows. It's been behind me for 20 minutes. She heard the sound of a chair being violently pushed back on the other end. Where are you now? Going home. I'm on Madison and 47th. Don't go home. His voice was pure command, the Don fully present. Go straight to the mansion. I'll send security to meet you on the way. And Quinn, don't stop for anything. She followed the instructions, changing route toward the Zareth mansion while her heart beat wildly against her ribs. 5 minutes later, 2 black SUVs appeared, one positioned behind her, another beside her. The sedan that had been following her immediately slowed down and disappeared at the next corner. When she finally arrived at the mansion, Evander was waiting at the entrance, face tense with contained worry and fury. He pulled her into his arms the moment she got out of the car, holding her as if he needed to physically confirm she was okay. I'm here. You're safe, he murmured against her hair, hands running over her back in comforting movements. I'll find out who it was, and I'll handle it. But Quinn couldn't stop shaking, fear still pulsing through her veins like poison. On Thursday, the envelope arrived. Quinn was in the apartment when she heard the sound of something being slid under her door. She frowned, approached cautiously, and picked up the white envelope with no identifying marks. Inside was a single photo, her and Evander leaving a restaurant 3 days ago, completely unaware they were being watched. And on the back of the photo, written in printed letters that made it impossible to identify the handwriting, he can't protect you. The envelope fell from her trembling hands, landing on the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the empty apartment. Quinn backed up until she hit the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold floor, arms wrapping around her knees as she tried to control breathing that threatened to turn into hyperventilation. Someone was watching. Someone knew where she lived, where she went, who she was with, and worse, someone wanted her to know she was being watched, that she wasn't safe, that Evander couldn't stop whatever was coming. She grabbed her phone and called Sable, because she couldn't call Evander now, not when she was on the verge of a complete panic attack. Sable arrived in 15 minutes, finding Quinn still on the floor, envelope and photo beside her. Her best friend picked up the evidence, analyzed it with experienced eyes, and then sat down next to her on the floor. "Quinn, you need to get out of this." Sable's voice was serious in a way it rarely was. "This isn't a game. Someone's either using you to get to him, or threatening you to push you away from him. Either way, it's too dangerous." "I know," Quinn whispered, tears starting to fall. "I know, Sable, but I love him, and he loves you." Sable gripped her friend's hand firmly. "But love isn't worth your life. It's not worth living in constant fear, looking over your shoulder, wondering when the next threat will appear." Sable's words echoed in her mind all night. Quinn didn't sleep, just lay staring at the bedroom ceiling, thinking about all the times she'd felt fear since getting involved with Evander, the car following her, the envelope, the encrypted messages about territory and weapons, the constant reality that he lived in a world where people died for power. She loved Evander, loved him with an intensity that physically hurt, but would it be enough? Would love be enough to live with this paralyzing terror every day for the rest of her life? On Friday night, Quinn asked to meet at his apartment. Evander opened the door with a smile that disappeared immediately when he saw the expression on her face. "What happened?" he asked, pulling her inside and closing the door. Quinn took a deep breath, gathering courage that seemed to want to abandon her. "I can't take it anymore." She saw when he understood, saw the exact moment the realization of what she was about to say hit him like a punch to the gut. "Quinn, I can't take the constant fear." The words came out in a torrent now that she'd started. "The car following me, the envelope, living knowing someone's watching me, that I'm a target just for being with you. I try to be strong, try to accept it, but I can't. I can't live like this." Evander closed his eyes, pain so deep crossing his face that Quinn almost stepped back. When he opened them again, there was resigned acceptance there that broke something fundamental inside her. "You deserve peace." His voice came out controlled with visible effort, each word clearly costing something precious. "You deserve to wake up without fear, live without looking over your shoulder, be happy without this weight on your back. Go and be happy, Quinn. Really." "Evander," she started, tears already falling freely. "Please," he interrupted gently, raising his hand to touch her face one last time. The touch was so soft, so full of love and goodbye that Quinn felt like her heart was being ripped from her chest. "Don't make this harder. Let me have the illusion that I made the right choice letting you go." Quinn nodded because she didn't trust her voice to form coherent words. Then she turned and left the apartment, tears falling so fast she could barely see the way. She took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, needing the physical movement to keep from completely falling apart. When she finally reached the car, she allowed herself to cry for real. Deep sobs that shook her entire body as she held the steering wheel and faced the devastating reality that she'd just let go of the man she loved because she was too afraid to stay. On Saturday morning, Quinn was on the apartment couch, still in pajamas, staring at a cup of cold coffee she'd forgotten to drink. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just existed in a state of numbness that was preferable to the sharp pain that threatened to consume her if she allowed herself to feel completely. Firm knocking on the door pulled her from the torpor. She stood up mechanically, expecting maybe Sable checking if she was still alive. But when she opened the door, she found Celestina Zareth, Nonna, standing in the hallway with straight posture and penetrating eyes that seemed to see right through her. "May I come in, dear? Or are you going to leave me here in the hallway?" The voice had a heavy Italian accent and a tone that clearly didn't accept refusal. Quinn stepped back automatically, allowing the familiar matriarch to enter. Nonna walked to the couch with practiced grace, sat down, and gestured for Quinn to sit as well. "You think I wasn't afraid when I married Evander's grandfather?" Nonna began without preamble, eyes fixed on Quinn's with unwavering intensity. "I was 19. He was a young Don, dangerous, violent when necessary, with enemies who literally wanted to see him dead and buried. I spent entire nights awake, terrified of every strange sound, every shadow at the window." Quinn sat down slowly, unable to look away. "But you know what I learned in those 60 years of marriage?" Nonna continued, voice becoming softer but no less firm. "Zareth men die before they let anything happen to who they love. It's not dramatic or exaggerated. It's literal. It's genetic. It's who they are at the most fundamental level of their souls. Evander would give every drop of blood in his body, every beat of his heart, before allowing a single hair on your head to be touched. But the fear," Quinn began, voice broken, "is completely valid." Nonna interrupted with surprising gentleness. "No one's saying it isn't. But let me ask you a question, and be brutally honest in your answer. Would you give your life for him?" The answer came instantly, without hesitation or need for reflection. "Yes," without thinking twice. "Then why do you expect his love to be less fierce, less absolute than yours. Nona leaned forward, taking Quinn's hand between hers, skin wrinkled but touch firm. He lives in a dangerous world, that's undeniable, but you would also choose to face danger if it meant protecting him, wouldn't you? Real love, true love, means accepting that you'll both get scared sometimes. We'll protect each other fiercely always. We'll face the world side by side even when the world seems too frightening. Tears began to fall as Nona's words penetrated every carefully constructed defense Quinn had erected around her wounded heart. You already ran once and came back because you realized love was worth the risk, Nona said with wisdom accumulated over decades. Are you going to run again now? Are you going to keep running every time it gets hard or scary? Because if you are, then yes, leave for good and let my grandson move on and try to rebuild the heart you broke. But if you're going to stay, she smiled, expression loaded with hope and challenge, then come back before it's too late, before he does something stupid and dangerous, because he doesn't care anymore if he lives or dies. The final words sent a completely different kind of fear down Quinn's spine. What do you mean by that? Zareth men without love are dangerous, Nona said simply. Not to those they love, but to themselves. They stop caring about self-preservation. They take unnecessary risks. And Evander, she hesitated, choosing words carefully. Evander has a very dangerous meeting scheduled for Monday, and I'm afraid of what he'll do if he doesn't have a reason to come home. The rest of Saturday and all of Sunday passed in a fog of obsessive thoughts. Quinn replayed every word Nona had said, every argument Sable had made, every moment of fear she'd felt, and every moment of absolute love she'd shared with Evander. On Monday morning, she made her decision. She was going back. She was going to fight. She was going to choose love, even with the fear, because the alternative, living without him, was infinitely more frightening than any external threat. She arrived at Evander's office at 9 a.m, determination firm in every step. But when she entered, she found only Rhys, sitting in his brother's chair with a tense, worried expression. Where is he? Quinn asked, immediate alarm firing in her chest. Rhys stood up, running his hand through his hair in a gesture identical to his brother's. He left, for the meeting with Rossetti, and Quinn frowned, not understanding why Rhys seemed so disturbed. He has meetings all the time. He went alone, Quinn. Rhys practically spat the words. Frustration and fear evident. No security, no backup. Nothing. Just him and a gun against God knows how many men. Quinn's blood froze in her veins. Why? Why would he do something so stupid? Because he's destroyed without you and doesn't care anymore if he lives or dies, Rhys shouted, control finally breaking. Because you left and took the only reason he had to be careful. Quinn felt like she'd been slapped. Nona's words echoed in her mind. Zareth men without love are dangerous to themselves. Where? She asked, already grabbing her purse. Port. Warehouse 12. I'm going. It wasn't a request or suggestion. It was an absolute declaration. Quinn, it's dangerous, Rhys began. If something happens to him and I'm not there, I'll never forgive myself, Quinn interrupted, voice firm, despite the terror she felt. And he can't die thinking I don't love him enough to fight. So let's go. Now. Rhys studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll call Sable and mobilize security. We're all going. 15 minutes later, they were in 2 SUVs heading toward the port. Quinn in the first vehicle with Rhys, Sable in the second with 6 armed security men. Her heart beat so fast it seemed to want to leap out of her chest. But for the first time in days, it wasn't paralyzing fear. It was determination. It was love. It was the absolute certainty that she wasn't going to lose Evander without fighting with everything she had. What none of them knew, it wasn't a meeting with Rossetti. It was Dorian's trap, and Evander was walking straight into it. Chapter 5. Trap and Rescue.
I came back for you.
Warehouse 12 was in an isolated area of the port, surrounded by rusted shipping containers and abandoned cranes that cast long, threatening shadows under the midday sun. Evander arrived at 11:50 a.m., exactly on schedule, driving alone in his black car. The silence of the place was disturbing. No dock workers, no sound of machinery, just the wind whistling between the metal structures. He got out of the vehicle with controlled movements, hand resting instinctively on the gun hidden under his jacket. His trained eyes swept the area, looking for signs of ambush, for anything out of place. The warehouse in front of him was large and deteriorated, corrugated metal doors closed, windows covered by years of accumulated grime. Something was wrong. Every instinct that had kept Evander alive during 8 years, as Dawn screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with this meeting, but he kept walking toward the warehouse entrance because part of him, the broken part that Quinn had left behind when she walked away, simply didn't care anymore. He pushed the side door that creaked on rusted hinges. The interior was dark, lit only by beams of light entering through cracks in the ceiling. Evander took 3 steps inside, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the dimness. and then he heard the unmistakable sound of doors being locked behind him. He turned quickly, hand going for his gun, but it was already too late. The main warehouse doors came down with a metallic crash, sealing all exits simultaneously. Fluorescent lights flickered and lit up in sequence, revealing the warehouse interior in all its extent, and the 12 armed figures surrounding him in a semicircle. But it was the figure emerging from the shadows at the back that made Evander's blood boil with cold, calculated rage. Dorian Ashcroft walked toward him with a confident, arrogant smile, gun hanging casually in his right hand. The advisor, the man Evander had trusted for years, now revealed as the traitor who had orchestrated all of this. Trap, Evander said calmly, voice devoid of surprise because on some level he already knew. You, me, Dorian confirmed, stopping a few yards away with an expression of absolute satisfaction. You're weak, Evander. In love, distracted. You're not fit to lead the Familia anymore, so I'm going to take what should have been mine for years. Evander laughed, a humorless sound that echoed through the empty warehouse. You don't have enough support. The Familia will never follow you. No? Dorian raised an eyebrow, gesturing to the men around them. The Rossetti are mine now. I negotiated a very lucrative deal with them, and half the Familia agreed that the leadership needs a change. I'm doing this for everyone's good. You're alone, Evander, completely alone. The realization of that half the men he had led, protected, and trusted had betrayed him, should have hurt. But Evander only felt numbness, the same numbness he'd carried since Quinn walked out of his life on Friday. Then do what you came to do, Evander said in a tired voice, letting his hand fall away from the gun. Because honestly, Dorian, I don't care anymore. Something gleamed in Dorian's eyes, triumph mixed with contempt. He raised the gun, aiming directly at Evander's chest, and then, exactly at 12:10 p.m., the side door of the warehouse exploded. The sound was deafening, metal being ripped from hinges, wood splintering, concrete cracking. Smoke and debris filled the air as the warehouse's side wall literally disintegrated under the force of the controlled explosion. Through the fog of dust and rubble, figures began to emerge. Quinn entered first, blonde hair tied in a high ponytail, jeans and leather jacket replacing her usual office clothes, expression of fierce determination on her face. Behind her came Sable with a laptop under her arm, and equally intense determination, Reese with gun already raised, and 6 security men armed to the teeth. The stunned silence following the explosion was broken by Quinn's voice, clear, strong, and loaded with anger that made even the armed men instinctively step back. You underestimated 2 things, Dorian, she said, walking toward the center of the warehouse without any apparent fear, while the security men spread out tactically. The real loyalty to the Familia, and a furious lawyer who won't let the man she loves die in a cowardly trap. Evander stared at her with an expression of absolute shock, mixed with something that looked dangerously close to desperate hope. Quinn, what are you— Later, she interrupted without taking her eyes off Dorian. First, we handle this. Dorian looked around, quickly assessing the situation that had turned against him in a matter of seconds. His men, the Familia traitors and the Rossetti he'd brought, looked significantly less confident now that they faced armed and organized opposition. This doesn't change anything. Dorian tried to regain control, voice rising with poorly disguised desperation. I still have numerical superiority. You have nothing, Sable interrupted, raising the laptop so he could see the screen. I hacked your communications 2 days ago. The Rossetti never agreed to the coup. They just pretended to expose traitors in their own organization. And as for the half of the Familia that supposedly supports you, she smiled, expression sharp as a blade. We have recordings of you trying to bribe them. They all refused and reported to Reese. You're absolutely alone, Dorian. Dorian's face visibly paled as he processed that his meticulously constructed plan had completely crumbled. His eyes frantically scanned the warehouse, looking for an exit that didn't exist, support that had never been real. Drop your weapons, Reese commanded, voice carrying authority that admitted no disobedience. Now, or face much more serious charges than treason. For a moment, no one moved. The tension in the air was so thick, it seemed possible to cut it with a knife. Then, one by one, Dorian's men began to lower their weapons and raise their hands. Some were Familia traitors, who realized they'd bet on the wrong horse. Others were Rossetti, who clearly hadn't been informed they were being used as pawns in a much larger game. But Dorian didn't lower his gun. Instead, he moved with surprising speed, crossing the distance to Quinn in 3 long strides and grabbing her from behind, arm wrapping around her neck while pressing the gun against her temple. Nobody move, he shouted, voice shrill with panic and desperation. Or I'll shoot her! I swear I'll shoot! It was a mistake. A tremendous mistake that Dorian realized a second too late. Quinn didn't panic, didn't freeze, didn't become paralyzed with fear as he clearly expected. Instead, she remembered every lesson Sable had insisted on teaching during the last few months. Self-defense techniques that Quinn had thought were overkill, but learned anyway just to calm her friend's worry. Her elbow moved backward with force, hitting Dorian directly in the ribs. Air left his lungs in an audible whoosh, the arm around her neck loosening for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough time. Quinn spun within his grip, hand coming up to grab the wrist holding the gun. Using his weight and momentum against him, she twisted the arm at an angle that made Dorian scream in pain, and dropped the gun, which fell to the concrete floor with a metallic clatter. In a fluid movement born of pure instinct and repetitive training, Quinn kicked the gun away, out of Dorian's reach, and then pushed him with enough force to make him stumble and fall backward. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Sable. "I told you the classes were worth it." But no one was paying attention to her because Evander had moved. In 2 steps, he was beside the fallen Dorian, gun drawn and pointed directly at the traitor's head. The expression on Evander's face was something terrible to behold. Cold, calculated fury of a man who had been betrayed by someone he trusted. "Give me a reason," Evander said in a voice so low and dangerous, it made the air around them seem to freeze. "A single reason why I shouldn't end this right now." Dorian looked up with eyes wide with genuine terror, finally comprehending the magnitude of the mistake he'd made. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, only ragged, irregular breathing. Quinn approached, placing her hand gently on Evander's arm. Her touch was soft, but firm, anchoring him back to reality through the red fog of rage threatening to consume him. "He's not worth dirtying your hands over," she said calmly, voice loaded with absolute conviction. "Not worth carrying that weight on your conscience. Let him rot in prison for the rest of his miserable life. That's a worse fate than a quick death." Evander looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd exploded through the warehouse wall like an avenging angel dressed in jeans and fierce determination. He saw the wisdom in her words, the truth in what she was saying. Slowly, with visible effort, he lowered the gun. "Reese," Evander called without taking his eyes off Quinn, "take this trash to the police. I have friends in the department who'll make sure he never sees daylight again. And the other traitors too." "With pleasure," Reese responded, already signaling for the security men to grab Dorian and the others who had participated in the conspiracy. 20 minutes later, Quinn and Evander were sitting in the back seat of one of the SUVs, while Reese drove in silence, giving them the necessary privacy. The adrenaline was starting to leave Quinn's system, leaving her trembling slightly with the delayed realization of everything that had just happened. Evander pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest with a force that bordered on desperation. She could hear his heart beating erratically under her ear, feel the fine tremor running through his body. "You came back," he whispered against her hair, voice broken with raw emotion. "You actually came back." Quinn pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, raising her hand to touch his face with infinite tenderness. "I came back because I love you. Because Nonna showed up at my apartment Saturday morning and asked me the right question, the only question that really mattered." "What question?" Evander asked, though he could see the answer already beginning to form in her eyes. "Would I give my life for you?" Quinn said simply, letting all the truth, all the love, all the absolute conviction shine through her words. "And the answer, Evander Zareth, is yes," without hesitating for even a second, without thinking twice, without regrets. Evander kissed her then, not the gentle, controlled kiss from before, but the desperate, necessary kiss of a man who had looked at death and seen salvation arrive in the form of the woman he loved. He kissed her as if she were air and he was drowning, as if she were light and he'd been lost in darkness. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Evander pressed his forehead against hers with closed eyes. "I'll never put you in danger again," he promised in a voice loaded with fierce conviction. "I'll never let anything threaten you again. No," Quinn interrupted gently but firmly. "Don't promise that, Evander, because you can't control everything, can't predict every threat, can't keep me in a safe bubble for the rest of my life." He opened his eyes, confusion clear in his gaze. "Promise something else," Quinn continued, holding his face between her hands. "Promise we face everything together, that you don't protect me from everything, but let me be by your side facing whatever comes. Promise we're real partners, in everything, in love, in danger, in decisions, in absolutely everything." Evander studied her for a long moment, then something changed in his expression. Acceptance mixed with admiration and love so deep it took her breath away. "I promise," he said solemnly, as if making a sacred vow. "We're partners, in everything, always." Quinn smiled through the tears that began to fall, and kissed him again, more gentle this time, but no less intense. It was a kiss of promise, of new beginnings, of a future they would face side by side. In the driver's seat, Reese smiled while pretending to focus completely on the road, giving them the illusion of privacy while his heart warmed to see his brother finally happy. 1 week later, With Dorian in prison and the familia stabilized, the time came for Quinn to officially meet the Zareth family and prove she deserved the place at the Don's side. Chapter 6. The Matriarch's Test.
She is worthy.
The Zareth mansion was lit up like a Renaissance palace that Saturday night, each window glowing with golden light that spilled across the meticulously maintained gardens. Quinn stopped at the entrance, looking at the imposing structure of stone and glass, and felt her stomach tie into a tight knot of nervousness. "Breathe," Evander said beside her, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers with comforting gentleness. "It's just dinner, with my family, who already adores you." "Nana adores me?" Quinn asked with evident skepticism, arching an eyebrow in his direction. "The same Nana who showed up at my apartment and basically lectured me about running away from you. Exactly why she adores you." Evander smiled, that rare and genuine smile that still made Quinn's heart do uncontrolled somersaults. "She respects people who stand up to her. And you saved my life. That counts for a lot." Before Quinn could respond, the front door opened, revealing Reese with a wide, mischievous smile that immediately put her on alert. "Ah, the heroine has arrived. Come in, Quinn. Prepare yourself for the most intimidating Italian inquisition of your life." "You're not helping," Evander muttered, pushing his brother aside while guiding Quinn inside. The mansion's interior was even more impressive than the exterior. High ceilings adorned with elaborate frescoes, a marble staircase that curved majestically to the second floor, crystal chandeliers casting rainbows of light across every polished surface. But Quinn barely had time to appreciate the decor before being led through wide hallways to the formal dining room. The table was absurdly long, covered with an immaculate white linen tablecloth and decorated with floral arrangements that probably cost more than Quinn's monthly apartment rent. Places were set with fine porcelain that looked antique and certainly irreplaceable, crystal glasses that reflected candlelight from silver candelabras, and silverware that gleamed with recent polishing. And there, at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her kingdom, sat Celestina Zareth. Nana was dressed with timeless elegance, a dark green silk dress that complemented her perfectly arranged white hair, a triple strand of pearls around her neck, and penetrating dark eyes that followed Quinn from the moment she entered the room. "Good evening, Nana," Evander greeted respectfully, kissing his grandmother's cheek before guiding Quinn to the seat beside him, which coincidentally was directly in Nana's line of sight. "Evander." "Quinn." Nana nodded graciously, but her eyes remained fixed on Quinn with an intensity that made the young woman feel like a specimen under a microscope. "How nice that you could join us tonight." Other people began to enter, Reese naturally, followed by a young brunette woman with bright green eyes who could only be Celeste, the sister Quinn hadn't met yet. There were also uncles, aunts, and cousins who were introduced in a sequence so fast that Quinn knew she wouldn't remember half the names. Dinner began with antipasto, a stunning selection of cured meats, artisanal cheeses, marinated olives, and grilled vegetables that looked like works of art arranged on the plates. Conversations flowed in a casual mix of English and Italian. Laughter echoed through the room, and Quinn began to relax slightly, until Nona spoke. "So, Quinn," the matriarch's voice cut through the side conversations like a sharp knife, instantly silencing the entire table. "You've won my grandson's heart." It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with the weight of unspoken judgment. Quinn felt all eyes turn to her, waiting for her response. Under the table, Evander's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent encouragement. Quinn took a deep breath, raised her chin, and met Nona's gaze directly without wavering. "With all respect, Mrs. Zareth, we won each other's hearts." The silence that followed was so complete, Quinn could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the opposite wall. Reese seemed to be holding his breath. Celeste's eyes were wide. Evander was tense beside her, clearly prepared to intervene if necessary. And then, Nonna smiled. It wasn't a small or polite smile. It was a genuine, approving smile that lit up her entire face and completely transformed her expression from severe to almost maternal. "Brava," Nonna said simply, raising her wine glass in Quinn's direction. "Very brave." The tension in the room evaporated instantly like mist under strong sun. Conversations resumed with renewed energy. Laughter returned, and Quinn felt like she'd just passed the first test of many to come. "You just made my grandmother smile," Evander whispered in her ear, voice loaded with poorly disguised admiration. "I love you even more now." Don't relax yet, Reese called from across the table, clearly having heard Evander's whisper. That was just the appetizer. Wait until the main course. He wasn't exaggerating. Dinner progressed through multiple courses. Creamy risotto with wild mushrooms, ossobuco that melted in the mouth, roasted vegetables seasoned with fresh herbs, and homemade bread still warm that released a heavenly aroma when broken. Between courses, Nonna asked seemingly casual questions that Quinn quickly realized were carefully disguised tests. Do you know Italian cuisine, Quinn? Some, Mrs. Zareth. My grandmother was of Sicilian descent, so I grew up eating some traditional recipes. Oh, and what was your favorite? Arancini. She made them with ragu and pea filling. I used to help her shape the little balls. Nonna nodded approvingly, and Quinn could feel she'd passed another invisible test. Later, when Celeste mentioned she was studying international law, Nonna turned to Quinn. And you, dear? Evander mentioned you were a corporate lawyer before working for him. That's right. Harvard Law. Graduated 3 years ago. I worked at a big firm in Boston before moving to New York. Harvard? One of the uncles seemed impressed. Excellent institution. And why did you leave a prestigious firm to be a secretary? Nonna asked, astute eyes studying Quinn carefully. Quinn hesitated for only a fraction of a second before deciding on complete honesty. Because I hated corporate politics, the power games, and defending large corporations in cases that morally bothered me. I wanted a change, so I accepted the position with Evander, thinking it would be temporary, while I figured out what I really wanted to do. And did you figure it out? Nonna pressed. Yes. Quinn looked at Evander, allowing all the love she felt to show in her gaze. I figured out I wanted to stay. And now I'm working to legitimize the Familia's operations, using my legal knowledge to make a real difference. Nonna studied Quinn for a long moment that seemed to stretch infinitely, then nodded with evident satisfaction. Good, very good. After dinner, while the men retired to the office with cigars and whiskey, a tradition Evander tried to protest but was firmly directed to by Nonna, Quinn found herself being guided to the kitchen by the matriarch herself. The Zareth Mansion's kitchen was a huge, welcoming space that contrasted with the formality of the rest of the house. Copper hanging from the ceiling, marble countertops worn by decades of use, and a persistent aroma of garlic, tomato, and basil that permeated every surface. Nonna began preparing coffee in an antique espresso machine that looked like it had been brought directly from Italy, precise and practiced movements of someone who had done this thousands of times. Quinn stood somewhat uncomfortably near the center island, not knowing if she should offer help or simply wait. Sit, Nonna ordered gently, gesturing to one of the tall stools. Quinn obeyed, watching as Nonna prepared 2 perfect espressos in tiny porcelain cups. The matriarch placed both cups on the counter, added sugar to hers, and then sat on the adjacent stool with surprising grace for someone her age. Do you know what it really means to be with a Zareth? Nonna asked without preamble, voice losing the formal tone she'd maintained during dinner. Quinn took a sip of the strong, bitter coffee, using the time to formulate a careful response. Danger, secrets that can't be shared with the outside world, absolute loyalty above almost everything. But also, she paused, thinking about everything she'd learned in recent weeks. Also, fierce love that knows no limits, unconditional protection even when not asked for, and family that would be willing to die for each other without hesitation. Nonna nodded slowly, eyes never leaving Quinn's face. And will you run when it gets hard? When the danger becomes too real, when the secrets weigh too much, when loyalty demands sacrifices you didn't think you'd have to make. I ran once, Quinn admitted with brutal honesty, allowing all the shame and regret from that moment to show through. I got scared, and I ran, but I learned the most important lesson. Life without him is infinitely worse than any danger that comes from being by his side. Evander is worth any fear, any sacrifice, any risk. I don't run anymore. Never again. Something changed in Nonna's expression. It softened in a way that made her look decades younger. She placed her coffee cup on the counter and stood up, walking to a specific drawer in an antique cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. When she returned, she carried a brown velvet box worn by time. Nonna opened the box with reverent care, revealing a triple-strand pearl necklace that gleamed softly under the kitchen light. The pearls were perfectly uniform, their luster indicating exceptional quality and considerable age. This necklace belonged to my grandmother, Nonna said softly, picking up the jewelry with fingers that trembled slightly. She wore it when she married in Sicily in 1897. My mother wore it at her wedding. I wore it at mine. And my daughter, Evander's mother, wore it when she married that impossible man. Nonna extended the necklace to Quinn, placing it gently in her hands. Wear it when you get married, because he's already bought the ring. Quinn almost dropped the necklace. He bought one? 3 weeks ago, Nonna confirmed with a conspiratorial smile that made her look years younger. It's in the top right drawer of his office, hidden under property documents. Huge diamond. Classic style. Exactly what you'd like if he knows you as well as I think he does. How do you... I know everything that happens in this family, Nonna interrupted with feigned wounded dignity. And don't tell him I told you. Let him think he still has some chance of completely surprising you. Quinn looked at the necklace in her hands, a family heirloom that had crossed generations, a symbol of approval that meant more than any words could express. Tears began to fall before she could stop them. "Thank you," was all she could say, voice broken with emotion. Nonna pulled Quinn into a firm hug, patting her back with maternal affection. "Welcome to the family, my dear." Officially. 15 minutes later, Quinn marched determinedly to the back veranda of the mansion, where she knew she'd find Evander. He was there alone, leaning on the stone balustrade, looking at the gardens illuminated by strategically positioned lights. When he heard footsteps behind him, he turned and smiled. "Survived Nonna's interrogation? You bought a ring," Quinn said without preamble, crossing her arms over her chest, but unable to contain the smile threatening to take over her face. Evander froze completely, expression going from relaxed to guilty in a fraction of a second. "She told? Nonna told? 3 weeks ago, apparently," Quinn continued, taking slow steps toward him. "Top right drawer of your office. Big diamond. Classic style. I'm going to kill my grandmother," Evander muttered, running his hand through his hair in a gesture Quinn now recognized as nervousness. This was going to be a surprise. Romantic. Planned. I had a location picked out. Speech prepared, photographer hired, but Quinn was laughing now, really laughing in a way that made Evander stop mid-rant and just look at her with an expression between exasperation and adoration. "You think this is funny?" he asked, but he was starting to smile too. "I think all of this is absolutely perfect," Quinn said when she could catch her breath. And then Evander Zareth, Dawn of the Zareth Familia, man who commanded an empire with an iron fist and never showed weakness, did something completely unexpected. He sighed deeply, looked at Quinn with all the love he felt shining clearly in his eyes, and knelt right there on the cold stone veranda. "It was going to be romantic and meticulously planned," he began, voice loaded with mixed humor and emotion. "But apparently my conspiring grandmother completely destroyed that plan. So, Quinn Thorne, love of my life, woman who saved my life literally and figuratively, partner in absolutely everything. Will you marry me?" Quinn was crying before she even fully processed the question, tears of pure joy streaming down her face as she looked at the man kneeling before her. "Yes," the word came out in a happy sob. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Evander rose in a fluid movement, pulling her into his arms and spinning her in the air while she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he finally put her back on the ground, he kissed her with tenderness and promise of a future they would face together. And then, from inside the mansion, came the unmistakable sound of applause and celebration. Quinn and Evander separated, turning to discover that apparently the entire family had gathered at the windows and doors leading to the veranda, watching everything with wide smiles and shining eyes. "I won the bet!" Reese shouted triumphantly, jumping with his fist in the air. "Pay up, you losers! I said it would be tonight." Evander looked at his brother with an expression of absolute disbelief. "You guys bet on this?" "Obviously," Celeste responded without any remorse. "Reese bet you'd propose tonight after Nonna told about the ring. I bet tomorrow morning. Uncle Marco bet next week. And I bet she'd find the ring herself and confront you first." Nonna added with royal dignity completely intact. "But I admit I underestimated how hopelessly in love you are, my dear grandson." Quinn was laughing so hard she had to lean on Evander to keep from falling. "Your family is absolutely insane." "Our family," Evander corrected gently, kissing her temple. "And yes, they're completely insane, but they're ours." 3 months of engagement brought happiness, but also the need for Quinn to completely understand Evander's world, including the side he'd always protected her from seeing. Chapter 7. The World Without Masks.
Test me again.
Quinn was sitting in front of the bedroom mirror, finishing applying dark red lipstick, when Evander appeared in the doorway, with an expression she was starting to recognize, the one that meant he was about to say something she wasn't necessarily going to like. "So," he began, leaning against the doorframe with studied casualness that was completely fake. "Remember when you said you wanted to be my partner in everything?" Quinn spun in the chair, arching an eyebrow in his direction. "That was literally 3 days ago, Evander. My memory still works perfectly." "Great, because I have a meeting this afternoon with the DeLuca Familia." He paused, measuring her reaction. "And I want you to come with me, okay?" Quinn frowned, not seeing what the problem was. "Why are you acting like you just asked me to jump out of a plane without a parachute?" "Because the DeLucas are rivals. They want territory expansion that goes against our interests. And this meeting," he hesitated, choosing words carefully, "is going to be very different from the business meetings you used to do in corporate offices with gourmet coffee and cookies." Quinn stood up, walking over to him and smoothing his tie with firm hands. "Evander Zareth, I've faced corporate lawyers who would make sharks look friendly. I literally invaded a warehouse under crossfire to save your life. I think think I can handle a tense meeting. It's not just tension. Evander held her hands, voice becoming more serious. It's that you're going to see a side of me I've always tried to protect you from witnessing, the real Dawn. And it's not going to be pretty or romantic or anything you've seen so far. Quinn studied him for a long moment, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, the fear of what she might think of him after. Then it's time for me to see it, isn't it? Real partners, remember? No more masks. 2 hours later, Quinn was sitting in an Italian restaurant in Queens that definitely wasn't open to the public that Tuesday afternoon. The establishment had been reserved for the meeting, which meant all the staff had been dismissed except the owner, who was clearly connected to the familia in some way, and guards strategically positioned at every exit. The table was set with deceptive elegance: white tablecloth, red wine already served, a platter of antipasti in the center, but the atmosphere was anything but civilized. Quinn could feel the tension in the air like static electricity before a storm, each man present studying the others with predatory attention. Evander was seated at the head of the table with Reese to his right, and Quinn, following his instructions, was seated to his left. On the other side of the table were 3 men: Marco DeLuca, the patriarch of the rival family, and his 2 adult sons, Nico and Sal. And Quinn saw the transformation in Evander the moment DeLuca walked through the door. The man who had proposed to her on the veranda with a voice full of love and vulnerability simply disappeared. In his place was someone Quinn barely recognized, posture straight and dominant, expression completely empty of emotion, dark eyes cold as winter ice. Even the way he held his wineglass had changed, every movement deliberate and loaded with contained power. This was the Dawn. This was the man who commanded an empire with an iron fist. Zareth, DeLuca greeted as he sat down, voice loaded with poorly disguised hostility. Thanks for accepting the meeting. DeLuca, Evander responded, and Quinn felt a chill run down her spine at his tone. The voice was icy, controlled, loaded with authority that admitted no questioning. There was no trace of warmth there. Marco DeLuca's eyes slid to Quinn with interest that made her want to instinctively pull back. Brought a woman to business? How interesting. Before Quinn could respond, Evander spoke in a voice that could freeze fire. My fiancé, and she stays. The way he said it, not asking permission, not explaining, just declaring it as immutable fact, made something in Quinn's stomach tighten. It wasn't exactly fear, but definitely recognition that she was witnessing a version of Evander operating on a completely different level. DeLuca smiled, but there was no humor whatsoever in the expression. Ah, fiancé. Congratulations. Although I must say, Evander, you're getting soft. First, the soft heart for a civilian, now bringing her to business meetings. Next thing we know, you'll be serving tea and cookies instead of running the familia. The silence that followed was so heavy, Quinn felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Evander didn't move, didn't change expression, but something in his eyes became absolutely lethal. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous in a way that made even Reese tense beside him. Test that theory. Please, see what happens. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And from the way DeLuca pulled back slightly in his chair, he understood perfectly. Let's get to business, Marco DeLuca said quickly, clearing his throat and trying to regain composure. We want access to the port, specifically warehouses 8 through 15. No. Evander's answer was immediate and final. Not negotiable, DeLuca pressed, voice rising slightly with frustration. Not negotiable, Evander confirmed calmly, taking a sip of wine as if they were discussing the weather. Those warehouses have been Zareth territory for 3 generations, and they'll continue to be. Nico DeLuca, the older son, leaned forward with an arrogant expression. Maybe you didn't understand the situation, Zareth. We're not asking. We're informing you that we're going to expand operations, with or without your cooperation. Reese laughed, a humorless sound that had a touch of clear threat. Seriously? You're making threats here? Now? How brave. It's not a threat, Marco DeLuca said in a tight voice. It's business reality. If you don't cooperate, there will be problems. And it was at that moment that Quinn saw something truly frightening. Evander leaned forward slowly, resting his elbows on the table, fingers interlaced with a calm that completely contrasted with the deadly intensity in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was so low Quinn had to strain to hear. But each word carried the weight of absolute promise. You want problems with me? He asked softly, almost conversationally. Because I solve problems, Marco, permanently. And if you think I've gotten soft, if you really believe that love for my fiancé has made me weak, he smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression Quinn had ever seen on a human face. Then please, keep testing. It'll be the last thing you do. The silence was absolute. Quinn could hear her own heart beating, each pulse echoing in her ears. Even the guards positioned at the doors seemed to be holding their breath. Marco DeLuca looked at Evander for a long moment, clearly evaluating whether he should continue pressing or back down. Whatever he saw in Evander's eyes made him decide quickly. Perhaps we could discuss alternative territories, DeLuca said finally, voice losing all previous arrogance. The northern area, maybe, where operations don't overlap as much. Perhaps. Evander agreed graciously, leaning back in his chair as if nothing tense had just happened. Send a formal proposal. We'll analyze it. The rest of the meeting passed in discussion of logistical details that were tense but civilized. Quinn stayed silent throughout, observing, learning, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. In the car heading back to Manhattan, heavy silence filled the space between them. Reese was driving, giving them privacy in the back seat, but Quinn could see from his eyes in the rearview mirror that he was carefully monitoring the situation. Quinn looked at Evander, studying his profile against the urban landscape passing by the window. He had returned. The man she knew was back, tension leaving his shoulders, expression softening, but she couldn't forget what she'd seen. Would you, she began, voice coming out more hesitant than intended. Would you kill him, Marco DeLuca, if he'd pushed harder? Evander turned to look at her directly, and the brutal honesty in his eyes was almost painful to see. If he threatened you or the family? Yes, without hesitation. I've done it before, Quinn. I'm not proud of it, but I won't lie about who I am. Quinn processed that, swallowing hard. Do you like it? The power? Making people back down in fear? I hate it. The word came out with vehemence that surprised her. Evander ran his hand through his hair, frustration clear in every line of his body. I hate having to be like this. I hate that people only respect me because they're afraid. I hate carrying the weight of every decision, every threat, every problem I need to solve. But it's who I need to be to keep the family safe, to keep operations running, to ensure no one tries to take what's ours through violence. Then why do you keep doing it? Quinn asked softly. Why not leave? Pass command to someone else? Evander laughed without humor. To who? Reese doesn't want it, and anyone else who took over would probably be worse. No code, no honor, just greed and violence without limits. He looked at her with a vulnerable expression that completely contrasted with the Dawn she'd seen minutes ago. At least I try to do it right. Try to minimize damage, protect innocence, maintain some kind of morality even in this world. Quinn was silent for a long moment, thoughts spinning as she processed everything. Then, slowly, a decision formed in her mind with crystal clarity. I don't want you to leave. The words came out firm, loaded with absolute conviction. Evander looked at her with clear surprise. What? You make the familia better. Quinn turned completely in the seat to face him. You have a code. You have honor. You try to do the right thing even when it's hard. If you leave, who takes over? Someone like Dorian? Someone who only cares about power and money without any moral scruples? She shook her head emphatically. No, I don't love you in spite of what you are, Evander. I love you including all of it. The vulnerable man who showed up at my door, the romantic fiancé who knelt on the veranda, and, yes, the intimidating Dawn who protects what's his with absolute ferocity. Evander stared at her as if seeing something precious and completely unexpected. But, Quinn continued, taking his hand between hers, let me be part of this for real, as a partner. I'm a lawyer, remember? I can help legitimize operations, create legitimate corporate structures, find ways to do everything you do but within the law. It could take years, but we can transform this into something that doesn't force you to be this Dawn you hate being. For a long moment, Evander just looked at her with an expression of admiration, so intense, Quinn felt heat rise to her face. You're absolutely incredible, he finally said, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a mixture of gratitude, relief, and deep love. How did I get so lucky to find you? Technically I found you, Quinn murmured against his lips with a smile. You were drunk and making bad decisions at 2 a.m. Best bad decision of my life, Evander agreed, kissing her again. From the driver's seat, Reese made an exaggerated sound of disgust. You guys know I'm still here, right? I can hear everything. It's disgusting. Then stop listening, Evander responded without taking his eyes off Quinn, a smile playing on his lips. Impossible. You're too loud with the eternal love declarations and— Reese! Okay. Pretending I'm deaf now. Quinn laughed, hiding her face in Evander's shoulder as she felt something settle inside her. Peace, acceptance, understanding that she loved all parts of him, even the scary ones, and that together they could build something better. With Quinn working to legitimize the familia, everything seemed headed for a happy ending, until the FBI knocked on her door with a proposal impossible to ignore. Chapter 8. Federal Investigation.
My answer is no.
Quinn was reviewing acquisition contracts for a commercial property in Tribeca when the receptionist called her direct line with a strangely tense voice. Ms. Thorne, there are 2 federal agents at reception asking to speak with you. Quinn's blood froze in her veins for a fraction of a second before legal training took control. Send them to conference room B. I'll be there in 5 minutes. She hung up. took 3 deep breaths to calm the nerves threatening to betray her carefully constructed composure, and picked up the phone again to dial Evander's extension. He answered on the first ring. FBI is here, Quinn said without preamble, keeping her voice low and controlled. 2 agents, requesting a meeting. There was a brief pause on the other end, before Evander responded in a voice that instantly transformed into the cold, calculating tone of the dawn. Don't say anything without a lawyer present. I'm coming to... No, Quinn interrupted firmly. I am a lawyer, remember? And if you show up, you'll only make the situation worse. Let me handle this. Trust me. Another silence, then a resigned sigh. I love you, and if you need anything, I know, Quinn said softly before hanging up. Conference room B was a neutral, professional space. Long glass table, black leather chairs, view of the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 agents waited there, standing politely when Quinn entered. The man was tall and thin, with gray hair cut military short, gray suit that looked straight out of an FBI manual on how to dress institutionally. The woman beside him was younger, maybe early 30s, brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, sharp brown eyes that assessed Quinn in a fraction of a second. Ms. Thorne. The man extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Special Agent James Whitmore, FBI. This is Agent Lisa Chen. Thank you for seeing us. Quinn shook his hand briefly, then Agent Chen's, before gesturing to the chairs. Please sit, although I must admit curiosity about what the FBI wants with me specifically. Whitmore and Chen exchanged a quick look before sitting. Quinn deliberately chose the chair at the head of the table, a power position that didn't go unnoticed by the agents. Let's get straight to the point, Ms. Thorne, Whitmore began, opening a folder and sliding a series of photos across the table toward her. We know what Evander Zareth does. We know the investment company is a front for organized crime operations. We know about money laundering, extortion, and ties to other criminal organizations. Quinn looked at the photos without touching them. Images of Evander in meetings, financial transactions, properties associated with the familia. She revealed no emotion in her carefully neutral expression. And this concerns me because, she asked in a calm voice, because you've been working directly with him for 2 years. Agent Chen intervened, voice softer than Whitmore's but no less determined. You have access to financial records, internal communications, complete organizational structure. You could give us everything we need to build a solid case. Testify against him, Whitmore said directly, leaning forward with intensity. Cooperate with our investigation. In exchange, we're offering total immunity for anything you might be involved in. And if you want, we can arrange a new identity, relocation through the Witness Protection Program, a completely new life away from all of this. The silence that followed was heavy as Quinn processed the proposal. Part of her, the small, scared part that still hadn't completely gotten used to the reality of being engaged to a mob boss, considered the offer for a millisecond. Then she remembered Evander kneeling on the veranda, remembered him saying he loved her, including all the scary parts, remembered the promise she'd made to face everything together. No. The word came out firm, loaded with absolute conviction that admitted no questioning. Whitmore raised an eyebrow with genuine surprise. No, just no, Quinn repeated, maintaining direct eye contact. I won't testify against Evander Zareth. I won't cooperate with the investigation. I don't accept immunity or a new identity. My answer is no in every possible way. Agent Chen leaned forward with an expression that mixed frustration and something that seemed almost like concern. Ms. Thorne, do you understand what you're doing? You're going to throw away your entire legal career, your freedom potentially, all for a criminal? And it was that word, criminal, that ignited a spark of genuine anger in Quinn's chest. He's not a criminal, Quinn said in a low voice but loaded with steel. And before you start with your list of alleged crimes, let me clarify something. I'm a Harvard-educated lawyer. I know the law probably better than both of you combined, and I guarantee that any case you try to build will fall apart in court because you don't have enough solid evidence, just assumptions, circumstantial connections, and photos that prove absolutely nothing. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, reassessing Quinn with narrowed eyes. You're protecting him. I am. Quinn didn't deny it. And I'll continue protecting him. So if you don't have anything more than a proposal I've already refused, I suggest you leave my office before I call lawyers, who will make you look incompetent for harassing a citizen who hasn't committed any crime. The agents looked at each other again, silent communication passing between them. Finally, Whitmore stood up, grabbing the folder with a sharp movement. This was your chance, Ms. Thorne, he said in a voice loaded with warning. When everything falls apart, and it will fall apart, don't say we didn't offer you a way out. Noted, Quinn responded dryly, remaining seated in a position of power while they walked toward the door. But before leaving, Agent Chen stopped and looked back. Is he really worth all of this? Quinn met her gaze without wavering. Every second, every risk, Absolutely everything. 10 minutes later, Quinn was in Evander's office reporting every detail of the conversation. He listened in silence, but she could see the tension growing in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the chair's armrests with force that whitened his knuckles. "I'm putting extra security on you," Evander said as soon as she finished. 24 hours. And, "No," Quinn interrupted him for the second time that day. Evander blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "Quinn, the FBI is... We're going to fight together," she said firmly, walking over to him and taking his hands. "Not with you hiding me behind guards while you handle everything alone. Together, remember? You promised." He pulled her into his lap, holding her as if he needed the physical contact to believe she was really there, that she hadn't run to accept FBI protection and leave him. "You're too brave for your own good sometimes. I learned from the best," Quinn said with a small smile, kissing him gently. "Now let's get to work, because I know exactly how to build a legal defense that will make the FBI give up." In the following days, Quinn worked like a woman possessed. She meticulously separated each familia operation into categories: legitimate, questionable, and definitely illegal. The legitimate ones received additional impeccable documentation, transparent corporate structures, detailed records proving total compliance with laws. The questionable ones were restructured or shut down completely, and the illegal ones, well, those were isolated so that no evidence could directly connect to the familia's command. She created layers upon layers of legal protection, subsidiaries that protected main assets, documents that could withstand any judicial scrutiny. It was exhausting work that required obsessive attention to detail, but Quinn attacked it with fierce determination. Reese watched with poorly disguised admiration. "She's scary when she focuses like that." "She's perfect," Evander corrected, watching Quinn through the glass of her office, where she was surrounded by piles of documents and 3 laptops open simultaneously. The following week, the FBI tried a new approach. They went after Sable. Quinn answered a frantic call from her friend at 11 p.m. on Thursday. "They showed up at my apartment, talking about hacking, about accessing federal systems, about prison." "Quinn, breathe," Quinn commanded, already grabbing her laptop and car keys. "Don't say anything to them. Absolutely nothing. I'm mobilizing lawyers now. The best ones I know. You'll be protected. I promise." And she delivered. She mobilized 3 powerful lawyers specializing in cybercrimes, built a defense demonstrating that any hacking Sable had done was in the context of legitimate cybersecurity, without criminal intent. She threatened to sue the FBI for harassment and invasion of privacy. The pressure on Sable evaporated within 48 hours. 2 weeks after the initial approach, Agent Whitmore appeared again at Quinn's office, this time alone, without Agent Chen, with an expression mixing frustration and reluctant respect. "The investigation is paused temporarily," he said without sitting. "Lack of sufficient evidence to proceed." Quinn didn't smile, but satisfaction must have been clear in her eyes. "Temporarily? This isn't over, Ms. Thorne," Whitmore warned, voice loaded with promise and threat. "We'll find something. Eventually." Quinn stood up, meeting his gaze with unwavering firmness. "I'll be waiting. And when you try again, I'll be even more prepared." Whitmore studied her for a long moment, then shook his head with something that seemed almost like admiration. "He's very lucky to have you." "I know," Quinn agreed simply. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I have a wedding to plan." That night, Evander found Quinn on the mansion's veranda, the same place where he'd proposed to her. She was looking at the stars, expression thoughtful, body finally relaxing after weeks of constant tension. "Let's get married soon," Evander said without preamble, wrapping her from behind with protective arms. Quinn turned in his arms, arching an eyebrow. "Excuse me? 2 months," he said firmly. "I want to get married in 2 months, before the FBI comes back. Before something else happens, before anything else tries to separate us. I don't want to wait anymore." Quinn smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. 2 months. Nona's going to freak out trying to organize everything so fast. Nona's going to love the challenge, Evander corrected, kissing her softly. "So, will you marry me in 2 months?" "Evander Zareth, I'd marry you tomorrow if it were possible," Quinn said honestly, pulling him into a deeper kiss. 2 months is perfect." From inside the mansion, they heard Nona's scream. 2 months? You think I'm a miracle worker? Reese, call the cathedral now. Celeste, guest list. Let's go. Let's go. We have a wedding to organize." Quinn and Evander laughed, forehead against forehead, savoring a moment of peace amid the chaos that was their lives. While wedding preparations happened under Nona's watchful eye, Quinn and Evander faced one last truth: that their love was born in chaos, grew in danger, and would be celebrated amid all of it. Chapter 9. New Beginnings.
Forever starts now.
6 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations that left Quinn simultaneously exhausted and amazed. The Zareth mansion had transformed into an operations center, commanded by a general more efficient than any professional army, Nonna Celestina in all her organizational glory. A Zareth wedding is an event, Nonna declared for the 10th time that week, reviewing endless lists in 3 different languages, while coordinating florists, decorators, and caterers with military precision. I accept nothing less than absolute perfection. Quinn laughed, watching the matriarch distribute orders over the phone in Italian too fast to follow. Evander appeared beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist with comfortable familiarity. Is she terrifying, or is it just me? He whispered in her ear. Definitely terrifying, Quinn agreed, but in an adorable and absolutely efficient way. The bachelorette party happened on the Thursday before the wedding, meticulously organized by Sable at a private club in downtown Manhattan. The space was decorated with sophisticated elegance, low lights, ambient music, full bar, and absolutely 0 strippers. No strippers? One of Evander's cousins seemed genuinely disappointed. What kind of bachelorette party is this? The kind I promised Evander, Sable explained with a completely serious expression. Quinn almost spit out her champagne. You promised him? He paid well. Sable shrugged without any remorse. Very well. Like, I bought a new car with the bribe money. I can't believe my fiancé bribed my best friend. Quinn shook her head, but she was laughing. Yes, you can, Sable retorted with a mischievous smile. And for the record, I would have refused the strippers anyway, but the extra money was great. The night before the wedding was self-imposed torture from tradition that Nonna absolutely insisted on maintaining. Quinn was at the apartment she still kept, though she barely used it anymore, while Evander stayed at the mansion, separated, miserably. At 11 p.m., a message arrived on her phone. Evander, I hate traditions. I want you here. Quinn smiled, typing a quick response. Quinn, tomorrow, forever. The wedding day dawned with a perfect blue sky without a single cloud, as if even the weather had conspired to make everything ideal. The historic Italian church in Brooklyn was decorated with white and gold floral arrangements that perfumed the air with the fragrance of roses and lilies. Quinn was in the side vestibule, looking at her own reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress was simple but stunning, white silk that flowed elegantly to the floor, modest neckline, long sleeves of delicate lace, and around her neck, the triple-strand pearl necklace that Nonna had given her, a family heirloom that had crossed generations. Ready? Reese asked from the doorway, offering his arm since he would be the one walking her down the aisle. Quinn took a deep breath, nodded, and placed her hand on his arm. Ready. The doors opened. Music began, and Quinn took the first step toward the rest of her life. Evander was waiting at the altar, impeccable in a black suit that seemed to have been made specifically for that moment. Reese was beside him as best man, and when Quinn began walking down the aisle, she saw tears begin to fall down Evander's face. You're crying, Reese whispered with a tone of pure delight. Shut up, Evander murmured back, but he didn't take his eyes off Quinn for a single second. When she finally reached the altar and stood facing him, Evander took her hands with fingers that trembled slightly. Hi, he whispered. Hi, Quinn whispered back, smiling through her own tears. The vows came too fast and not fast enough simultaneously. I, Quinn Thorne, she began, voice firm despite the emotion, promise to love you in all the chaos, in all the danger, and in all the uncertainty, because you, Evander Zareth, are my certainty, my anchor, my home. Evander squeezed her hands, wiping away tears with a quick movement before beginning his own vows. I, Evander Zareth, promise to always protect you, honor you in every decision, and make you laugh every day for the rest of our lives. Because your smile, Quinn, is literally my reason for existing. The reception was a spectacle of pure joy. Their first dance happened under soft lights, while an orchestra played an old Italian melody. Evander held her close, whispering against her hair, You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, today and always. Quinn smiled against his shoulder. You're not looking too bad yourself. When the music ended and everyone gathered for toasts, Nonna stood up with a champagne glass raised, eyes shining with proud tears. To Quinn, who tamed the lion and became a lioness, she declared in a voice that echoed through the hall. Welcome to the family, my dear granddaughter. Cheers! Everyone responded in unison, voices blending in celebration. 1 year later, the new apartment was a bright, spacious space on the Upper West Side, the perfect compromise between practicality and security. Quinn was in the home office, reviewing contracts when she heard the front door open. I'm home, Evander called, and seconds later he was behind her, arms wrapping around her waist as he kissed her neck. How was your day? Productive. Quinn leaned back against him, smiling. Closed 3 more legal contracts today. The familia is 60% legitimate now. You're literally a miracle. Evander murmured with genuine admiration. My personal miracle. Quinn spun in the chair to face him, heart beating fast with nervousness and excitement. I have news. Evander studied her, reading her expression with ease, born of deep intimacy. Good or bad? Depends, Quinn said, allowing a smile to touch her lips. Do you want to be a father? Time stopped. Evander froze completely, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. What? Pregnant. 8 weeks, Quinn confirmed, watching every micro-expression cross his face. Then he lifted her from the chair in a sudden movement, spinning her in the air while laughing with pure, absolute joy. I love you so much. So much. Later that night, they were on the couch, Quinn leaning against Evander's chest, his hand resting protectively on her still flat belly. Will our child have your stubbornness? Quinn asked in a playful tone. Or your devastating sarcasm? Evander retorted, kissing the top of her head. Poor kid, Quinn murmured. Doesn't have a chance of being normal. Evander laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. But they'll be very, very loved. Like me, Quinn said softly. More than anything in the world, Evander promised with absolute conviction. Quinn was silent for a moment, just appreciating the peace, the love, the absurdly perfect life they'd built together. Thank you. For what? For showing up drunk at my door that early morning. Evander laughed again, pulling her closer against him. Best terrible decision of my life. I love you, Evander Zareth. I love you, Quinn Zareth, forever. And there, in the apartment that was a home built on love born in chaos, grown in danger, and celebrated amid all of it, they finally had peace.